כל שנה אני מנסה לכלול בתוכנית הכינוס מידע חדש וידע פרקטי שיעזור לכם בחיפוש עבודה בדרכים שונות. הערב יש לנו 4 הרצאות קצרות על מגוון נושאים שאני מקווה יהיו שימושיים עבורכם. The Azriali Foundation is dedicated to strengthening Israeli society with initiatives in the fields of education, medical and scientific research, community, welfare, arts, and culture. The Azriali Fellows Program promotes academic excellence and leadership through graduate studies fellowships, international postdoctoral fellowships, and returning faculty fellowships, which apply to our audience today. Dr. Aviad Stolman became the global director of the Azriali Fellows Program 2 years ago, leaving his position as head of collections at the National Library of Israel. Aviad will explain to you the advantages of the Azriali Fellows Program. אני שמחה להזמין לבמה את דוקטור אביעד סטולמן, המנכ"ל העולמי של תוכנית עמיתי עזריאלי. אביעד יספר לכם על יתרונות תוכנית העמיתים של קרן עזריאלי. דוקטור אביעד סטולמן, אתה מוזמן לבמה. בבקשה.
Good evening, good afternoon. Not sure what it is. I've been locked in this building for a while. So I'm here to present to you some of the advantages of the Azriali Fellowship. Thank you, Chevy, and we'll go over our mission, who are Azriali Fellows, something about our selection process, the fellowship and its components, and if we have some time, I'll also talk about an interesting campaign which relates to what Moti was one of my main advisors when I wrote the strategic report for this campaign. So let's begin with our mission. So the Azriali Fellowship has been around for 15 years, and we always think when we look at candidates, we're looking for two main things. One is obviously academic excellence, track record on what they have done so far, and also about their science. So we are always nurturing, and you'll see why, and we're very unique if you look at other fellowships in Israel, because we invest a lot not only in the science but also in the personal growth of our fellows. And in addition, when we're thinking about the community, and we've had so far 400 Azriali fellows, we're thinking about ways to have them meet together many times a year, and eventually with this international network that we're setting up. Now, I said that we invest in Israeli scientists, or in scientists at all, more generally, but we're actually investing only in the initial stages, in the first steps, in the formative stages, and that's why our fellowship has 3 tracks. It comes in 3 flavors. We have a PhD program, we call it the Graduate Studies track. We select about 25 fellows every year. In addition, we have an international postdoctoral one, where we bring about 25 fellows every year, mostly from Europe and Canada. And we have a smaller track for those who received a tenure track position in one of the Israeli institutions. You mentioned Ido Kaminer. He's one of our heroes, one of our fellows on that track. During the fellowship, we provide what I call three layers of support, 3 pillars of support. So the first one is obviously financial, and I'll go into more details in a while. There's a professional. We invest a lot in workshops, in mentoring, public speaking, communication, everything they need, and things that usually they don't get in the university system. And in addition, because of the way we have set up, there's a community, people supporting each other on the emotional level, on the social level, and so on. So you must be wondering, who are the Azriali Fellows? Obviously, outstanding from an academic perspective. We're looking for groundbreaking research. There are a lot of excellent people, but not everyone does groundbreaking. So I can't say that all of our fellows are doing cutting edge groundbreaking, but we favor those and we try to get those. But in addition, we're looking for leaders. We're looking for people who can change, who can lead within their communities in different ways, and we're looking for people who are also curious people who demonstrate intellectual curiosity that extends beyond their own scientific field. So when people apply to the fellowship, we look for the academic excellence. It's obviously easier when we're judging, for the faculty positions and the postdoc. It's more difficult when you're looking at a young PhD student, but we're able to do that. We're looking for the innovative research and other fields. So far, as I said, there have been about 400 Azrieli fellows, including the current ones, and this gives you a description, a breakdown of the most popular fields. When the fellowship began, it was only about sciences, architecture, and education, but later on, nowadays, it's open in all fields: humanities, social sciences, life sciences, and exact sciences. We grew up tremendously. What you see here in the graph is the number of current fellows we have in every year. So right now we have more than 120 fellows, and within a couple of years we're going to reach 150 fellows at every given moment. And that's because of the expansion of the postdoc program that I'll talk about in a minute. Something about our selection process, which is important for you and maybe for some of your colleagues and friends and people who are watching us. Since we have three types of fellowships, three tracks, they're slightly different. So you can see that in the PhD program, the first stage takes place internally within the universities. The universities have to nominate, they probably pick their best, and they send those applications to us. Then it goes through a review of academic committees. Right now we have, the scope is quite large. We have 12 academic committees working in the different tracks, and eventually those who are shortlisted are invited to an interview. In the postdoc, we're much more liberal, much more open, at least now. You don't have to be nominated by an Israeli institution. Anybody can apply as long as they have an Israeli sponsor. An Israeli sponsor meaning there is a PI, there is a supervisor who says, yes, I'm willing to accept so-and-so into my lab. Those who, then we put in a pre-selection where we look into the files and we review the files, and later only those who make the cut come to the committee's review, and eventually there's an interview. Unfortunately, it's all on Zoom right now. In the faculty track, it's very different. It's much more similar to the Alon Fellowship. The academic institutions select the elite group, maybe 10% of their new incoming professors, tenure track positions, and there's no interview. Something about the fellowship. So what you see here is the financial component of what it means to win an Azrieli fellowship. So actually the numbers here are very high because I've given the maximum. It depends on various factors, but what you see here is what the Azrieli Foundation in Canada actually sends to the Israeli university. So let's say if there is a graduate student, a new graduate student, so this is the sum of money that we will invest directly in every fellow. Obviously, the faculty early career, a very large component of it is about 750,000 shekels is given as a grant for the incoming tenure track position. These are some of the elements of the fellowship that some of them I've mentioned before. I'd like to speak on the one on the top left, the Fellows Forum. We've always had Fellows Forum. Fellows Forums, I'll just give you an example of what they are. So you have at every given moment, we have about 75 PhD students, and we meet 4 times a year. And when we meet, every time between 5 and 10 of the fellows, usually the incoming fellows, will present their own research to the rest of the group. And that's a very, very good way of an introduction, and it lets people meet, understand what other people are doing. Now, we don't just tell them, okay, show up on this date in Tel Aviv and give your lecture. We prepare the fellows, and one of the main benefits of this fellowship is this training, mentoring, how to present your science to a very broad community, because within that group you have people from the social sciences, you have, and even if you're a physicist, the chemist may not understand what you're talking about, or the biologist. So it has to be in a certain level, taking into account that everybody's very intelligent, very knowledgeable, but not necessarily in the other fields. And you can see here other things that we do during the fellowship. If I have a few more minutes, I'll speak about the campaign. So Moti spoke before about the high level of Israeli students, high level of Israeli science. And one of the things we know, and there are several metrics that demonstrate the high quality of Israeli research. I would say, per capita level of Israeli, an Israeli article is published, is like number 6 in the world. And there are other metrics that also demonstrate the high quality of Israeli research. Now, when you look at this interesting graph, it's not about COVID. Everybody's like thinking, what's the spike? It shows the amount of articles published by Israeli scientists in the past 25 years, about 25 years. And it looks very, very interesting. It looks nice growth, right? Going up from about 10,000 papers a year to about 30,000 years. But if you zoom out, it was very misleading, because you see that green line that you saw before, it's the same green line. But when you put it in perspective and what's going on around the world, you see that Israel suffers from a productivity issue. So the quality may be, every article is amazing. I'm sure the Israeli articles are better than the Iranian articles. But as far as productivity, we have a problem. So we recognize that in the Azrieli Foundation that Israel suffers from a labor shortage. Part of the labor shortage is, by the way, the fact that we're sending our best fellows, we send them abroad for a few years to do their postdocs, and everybody knows that the postdocs are like the bread and butter of every lab. You have people who are well-trained, who are very motivated, and instead of using them here, we're sending them to the United States or Europe or whatever. And at the same time, we're not getting the very best European and American postdocs to come to work in our labs. So we suggested it was March 2020 to the Azrieli Foundation, we suggested to do two things at once. One is to scale up our own international postdoctoral program. It used to accept only 6 fellows every year, and those fellows would come only from Canada. And so we suggested to raise that to 24 fellows every year who will come from Europe, mostly from Europe. Canadians are still eligible, but the main thing was to open it up to Europe. And the other thing we're doing, which has nothing to do with our own fellowship, is to kickstart a campaign that will try to get here more postdocs into the country. So we decided to, as I said, to focus on Europe because for many reasons, we feel we're more likely to get people from Europe than we're going to get them from the United States. By the way, only 3% of American graduates of PhDs leave the United States to go anywhere. So they're not likely. Maybe if they're Jewish, maybe they feel like they want to spend a year or two in Israel, but it's unlikely, and we can't depend on that. Just to give you some numbers, these may not be updated. There were from 2020 or 2019, but I don't think it's changed dramatically. This shows you the number of postdocs in Israel at a given moment, and where what I call the 12 scientific superpowers. I'm talking about European countries that are part of the ERC. Based on the ERC, if I look at the top countries, Switzerland and Germany and France, okay, so you have lots of lots of, 70 in the whole country, which means if they come for 2 or 3 years, it means that every year we're getting like 20, 25 Germans, and that's in all the fields, including the humanities, French and British, and all 900 countries, you have 31. So the numbers are very, very low, and the idea of this campaign is to increase this number. We are hopeful that maybe within 5 years, we didn't know about COVID when we wrote this program. I don't know what are going to be the effects of COVID, but our idea is to increase those numbers. I don't have enough time to go into the details of the campaign, but I will say that we're taking a very bottom-up approach. Just to give you an idea of what we did last year, we decided this year to focus on chemistry, because Israel is a leader in chemistry. It's a leader in science, but in chemistry it's a super leader. And there are very few postdocs that we're able to attract in those fields. And at the same time, we decided to focus on the Netherlands, because we would like to see what happens are we able to get more Dutch fellows into Israel. So we sent 40,000, we snail mailed 40,000 letters to PhD students in various stages in the Netherlands. So we're taking a very bottom-up approach. We're doing many things. Obviously, with COVID, it's much harder. Things are much harder for many reasons. But I will tell you about, this is really my last slide. We're launching in the spring, early April, we're launching a website which will be entitled Research in Israel. Very similar, the Germans have something like that. It's called Research in Germany. And the main component is actually this database, and the database will be the yellow pages of Israeli research. So we will ask Israeli PIs, Israeli scientists, Israeli scholars to put their names. It's a very short form. They put in all their information, and that will allow, that will be the main driving force for the postdoc campaign, because we hear it a lot from people who say, okay, you've convinced me, this is a great place, but I'm looking for, I want to know, there's a central database that will gather all the information in all the fields. And we've also heard from many Israeli, especially younger scientists who are not well known or yet. They're very hard for them to find people. So it's like a dating app, if you want. But the site will include much more information about the Israeli universities, available fellowships. We don't really care whether they come through Azrieli or they come through the Academy of Sciences Fellowship or EMBO or Marie Curie. They can come any way they want, and sometimes they don't even have to bring their money. There's ERC money in the labs. One of the things that Moti told me is the main problem is not the money. It is, people will always tell you and complain about the financial issues, but that's not the main problem. I think this was also the theme of you. There are a lot of things that we can do. We just have to attract. My last slide is our team. We're fortunate to have here Tal Mordech, who is I see this is the old title. Unfortunately, wasn't replaced yet. But I see Tal is the head of our admissions. So maybe some of you have had the chance to speak to him. We have a wonderful team. We're growing because of all the things that we're doing right now and that we will do in the next few years. So thank you very, very much.